Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third week of Dine Learn for the summer. Shkar to the Kala family for sponsoring tonight's Ilu Nishmas Yaakov Asher Ben Ita, our wonderful milchus tonight. Shkar to Moshe again for organizing it every week. We're learning Hilchos Nedarim and Shuas, practical issues that arise. So I thought we'd take a little bit of a digression from the language of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch to discuss a very common issue that arises, and that's swearing to God. You hear it all the time. People say, I swear to God this, I swear to God that. You know, I'm not saying anyone here says that, but it's very common in our country. Is that mutter? So we already covered that if you swear, even without using Shem Hashem, so you're obligated to fulfill that oath. There is a sheet, I think it's a Rambam, who says it's only Dirabanan, most hold it's Daraisa. But even though you're biblically obligated, if you fail to do that, you do not violate one of the Aseres HaDibros, so Sisa es Hashem Hashem Elokecha L'Shav, because you didn't use Hashem's name in vain, because you didn't use Hashem's name at all. So even though there's one prohibition, probably Deraisa, there isn't that second one. But the question arises in the poskim. Let's say you swear in English, Yiddish, Polish, and you fail to fulfill it. Do you violate the biblical prohibition of Lo Sisa Hashem Elokecha L'Shav? And the main place where this is discussed of all places is in Hilchos Avodah Zarah. So the Mechaber talks about this case where someone is sick, they have a wound, and to heal it, you do this pagan practice of reciting a verse on top of the wound, and then you spit into it. And apparently people believe that would heal the wound. Dr. Meiri is grimacing there at the very notion of doing that. Be that as it may, so the Ramah says you don't violate this Isser, probably Isser Deraisa, of doing that if you say the verse in another language other than Hebrew. So the Bach on that disagrees. He says, what do you mean? If you're in the bathroom, if you're in a Makam Tinofis, dirty place, smelly place, you're not allowed to say Divrei Torah, even in any language, even in English, even in Yiddish, even in Polish. So he says, therefore, you see, saying Hashem's name in English or Polish or Yiddish, it constitutes Hashem's name, some sort of Davar Kodesh, so therefore the Ramah must be wrong, and even if you say a verse in another language, you still violate this prohibition. The Shach disagrees.
It's not a deraisa to think or say Divrei Torah in the bathroom.
So the Shach goes even further. He says the Bach is wrong because thinking of Divrei Torah, you don't have to have any shemus. It's not shemus. It's not kodesh. It's not something written on a cloth or anything like that. It's any Torah thought. So whether it has the kedusha of the Hashem's name or not, it doesn't matter. However, he says if you write God's name in another language, like Got, so that for sure you can erase it. There's no Isser. Normally there's an Isser to erase Hashem's name. Says the Shach, if you write it in Yiddish or any other language, there's no such prohibition. Wow!
What about G-D?
That's our topic for tonight, G-D. So there are a number of related issues. You're allowed to daven in any language. It's mefurish. So if you daven in any language and you say, does that mean Shem Hashem in another language is good? Well, say you want to say a bracha. Could you just say it in English? We have the English, we have the Art Scroll, we have the currents that are here. So you use the translation. Are you Yosei the bracha? So that's one question. If you're Mekalel someone, if you curse someone, it's a biblical prohibition to curse someone with God's name. If you curse someone in English and use God's name in English or in Yiddish or in German, so what's the deal? So this is a big machlokas whether they all tie together or not. Because it's mefurish in Shulchan Aruch, in Choshen Mishpah, Simon Chafei, that if someone curses with Hashem's name, even a kinu, even a nickname, even an idiomatic expression for Hashem, you still violate the biblical prohibition. And on that halacha, so the Tumim, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, he rails against people who write in their letters adieu. How do you say goodbye in French? Adieu. So that uses the name of God in French. So it says you write that on a letter, you send it to someone, they throw it in the garbage, they're treating Hashem's name with disrespect. So that's what the Tumim says, but others disagree. And by the way, so centuries later, when Chaim Ozer Grzinski quoted this Tomim, he has in parentheses, that was it. Nowadays, French language has evolved, and a do is a language on its own. It's not using Shem Hashem. So no matter, even the Tumim, even Rabbi Yonah Strabishers would agree nowadays, you could write a do and throw it in the garbage. Okay. So in the early 1800s, there was this new development in Judaism called Reform. And one of the things they wanted to do is to pray in German, because people didn't have a good yeshiva education, a lot of people. They didn't understand the Hebrew, they didn't know what it was. So the Reform says, okay, we'll pray in German. And while they're at it, they'll make a few changes here, a few changes there. So it was a big shaila, can you be Yotzei if you daven? And this is interesting, because they gathered a lot of poskim together, the biggest poskim of the generation, to write tshuvas about it. Now, did the Reform care what those tshuvas said? No. Did it accomplish anything? No. But what it did accomplish is it left us a rich literature for a lot of the issues that arise for us. Surprisingly, living at that time, so Rabbi Yaakov Edlinger was the Aruch Laner. He was a Rav in Altona, Germany, where there was a big Reform congregation down the block, so to speak. So he has a tshuva on this issue. And he does not seem to address Reform whatsoever. He says, okay, so the Shach says you're allowed to erase God's name in any language. But that's the exception. In any other case, such as cursing in Hashem's name, such as davening in German, such as saying a bracha in German, you are Yotzei. It works. And what's his proof? His proof is there are so many cases of a suffix bracha. You don't know what bracha to make. You don't know if you ate a shear, do you say a bracha achrona or not? Of course, we're all machmir, we eat more and more and more. But so you have a case of suffix bracha. So he says, why didn't anyone ever say, so just say the bracha in German? So if it's not saying Shem Hashem's name in vain, so there's no problem of bracha levatala and of bracha she'eina tzricha. And if you don't say so good. So he says clearly there is a problem of saying God's name in vain if you say it in German. Otherwise, they would have come up with this idea of just say the bracha in German, and you get out of all the doubts, which is surprising, very surprising. Why is it surprising? Because as I said, Rabbi Yaakov Edlinger wrote the Aruch Laner. The Aruch Laner is a very detailed commentary on Shas, not all of Shas, on certain Masechtas. Line by line, kvetch by kvetch. He goes, Chas v'shalom, not saying anything bad, but he gets into the nitty-gritty of the Shakla V'Tarye. Who else did that? The Pnei Yehoshua. And the Pnei Yehoshua actually says, you know what we should do? Here's a great idea. If you have any suffix on a bracha, say it in German. Say it in another language, because there's no problem of saying Hashem's name in vain, and you're Yotzei. So apparently the Aruch Laner did not know this Pnei Yehoshua. But there is a suggestion to the point that the Aruch HaShulchan says, I do it all the time. He actually says it. Siman Reish Beis. The Aruch HaShulchan says, if you have any doubt about whether to say Bracha Achrona, just say it in Yiddish, say it in Polish. And he says, I do it all the time. Wow. So he's not the only person to write on that. In the time of Reform, Rabbi Akiva Eiger has 2 tshuvas on it. So one tshuva, he doesn't seem to be addressing Reform whatsoever. And this is a very, very important tshuva at Siman Chaf Hey, where he says God's name in any other language is kinui, which means it's a nickname for Hashem, which means you're not allowed to curse anyone with that. But cursing is the exception. Every other case, it's chol. There's no problem with saying Hashem's name in vain if you say it in another language. There's no problem of erasing it if you write it in another language. It can't be yotzei anything if you say a bracha or daven in another language. Now, I never understood really the kasha, because it's very easy to daven in English and use Hashem's name in Hebrew, right? So the hard part, so you don't really know, someone who didn't get a yeshiva education, they don't really know Hebrew, they don't understand it, but the Shem Hashem they could say. So just read in English, blessed art thou, and then say Hashem Elokeinu, and then say the rest in English. That's not so hard, and maybe that's what the Mishnah and the Gemara mean, that you could be Yotze in any language. And that erases all the proof for the others. I don't know, I've never seen anyone say this, it just occurred to me that could be what it means. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger says it's just a kinui, and therefore there's no problem of erasing it. Therefore, you're not Yotze if you say a bracha, if you daven. And this tshuva of Rabbi Akiva Eiger, so that's number one. Tshuva number one. Tshuva number 2 is unbelievable. Unbelievable who he quotes. You'll never believe it. This was told to me by Yisrael Hirsch. Remember, he used to live in the neighborhood. He used to have a shul on Nostrand Avenue, and I moved to the 5 towns. So he pointed out to me, Rabbi Akiva Eiger, in his Chidushim on Megillah, on Daf Yud Zayin, I believe, he talks about, can you be Yotzei tefillah in German or in Polish. I believe this was a tshuva written against reform. I haven't checked it, but I believe that's the context. And he says, no, you can't. And one of the reasons, he has many reasons why, one of the reasons he says is you can't translate Shem Hashem into any other language. It just doesn't work. Because look at this guy who translated the Chumash into German, Moses Mendelssohn. He translated, how did he translate Yud Kei Vav Kei? He translated it as the eternal. I think it's Der Ewiger. Der Ewiger. That's how he translated it. Because Yud Kei Vav Kei, right? The past, the present, the future. So that's how he translated it. It's pretty intelligent, pretty smart. But says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, but there's also a connotation of adnus, of lordship, that is totally lost in the eternal. He says there's no real good way to translate Hashem's name into German, and therefore you can't be Yotzei if you daven in German. Now again, why can't you just say Shem Hashem in Hebrew and do the rest in German? He doesn't address that. So I think that he was writing against reform, saying what you guys are trying to do doesn't work. But it's also very interesting that God, when we say God, is not a translation of Hashem's name. That's not Hashem. That's what Rabbi Akiva Eiger is saying. It's not really Hashem's name in English. Or Gott. That's not Hashem's name in German or in Yiddish. It's the best we could do. It's a kinoi. It's like a nickname. It's an approximation. It's how we do it. So based on this, Rav Soloveitchik, so he used to say, writing G-D is Am Aratzis Gemura. That's what he would say. We're going to talk about maybe it's not. But he would say it's Amaraz's Gemura. Why? Because the name G-O-D is a kinoi for Hashem. So if you it's just a nickname. It's what we use to refer to Hashem. So if you put on G-D and you refer to Hashem, it has the same status of G-O-D. So he says it doesn't matter. You could put down 4 asterisks if you mean that to refer to Hashem. That's just like writing G-O-D. But either way, you can erase it. That's the din of the Shach, which nobody, except for the Bach, nobody seems to disagree with. Or very few seem to disagree with. And Miman of Shach. So let's say you write a sefer, you write a book, put it on the shelf. So what's the whole reason anyone would write G-D? It's so it doesn't get thrown in the garbage, right? You don't want people to treat it disrespectfully. Okay, so a newspaper, people schlep around, they spill food on it, they put it in recycling of the garbage. So that I could see why you don't want it to have an actual Shem Hashem. But a book goes on the bookshelf. I mean, do you really have to be worried that someone's going to throw it in the garbage? It'll be treated disrespectfully? I'm not so sure. So in a book itself, why write G-D? I don't understand, according to any shita, why in a book you would write G-D. I don't know. But be that as it may, Rabbi Akiva Eiger, and so Reb Chaim Ozer Grzinski, Reb Chaim Ozer the Great, Reb Chaim Ozer of Vilna, so he quotes Rabbi Akiva Eiger in a tshuva, he quotes kashus you might ask on him, and he has a pilpul, and he concludes that Rabbi Akiva Eiger, he agrees with Rabbi Akiva Eiger, that's pshat, that's the din, that Shem Hashem has a kinoi, which means you can't curse with that name, but you're not yotze anything with that name, and you can erase it, it's mutter to erase it. However, he adds, it's his own chiddush, the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, which says, the Gemara, so when the Chashmonaim won, so they instituted that in every star, every contract, you should write Shem Hashem. You should write something like L'Kel Elyon. It's a way to bring Hashem into our daily routine and into even our business. So the Chachamim were very upset about it, because what happens to a star? Okay, so it's an IOU. So you pay the IOU, you give it back, and what do they do with it? They tear it up and throw it in the garbage. So you can have Shem Hashem in the garbage. So as Reb Chaim Ozer, so what's the problem here? They're throwing Hashem's name in the garbage, he says, is gram mechika. It's indirectly causing it to be erased. You're not erasing it yourself. You're only putting it in the garbage, and eventually it'll deteriorate, it'll disintegrate, or it might get rubbed against other things, and it'll be erased. That's not usher. That's gram mechika, indirectly causing it to be erased. It's okay. So he says, even when there's no prohibition to erase Hashem's name, you still can't allow it to be treated disrespectfully. And throwing it in the garbage is treating even a kinui, even something that isn't Hashem's name, disrespectfully. Therefore, he says, he actually says, he doesn't say write G-D. He says, write Gimel-Tes for Got. Then that way, that kinui won't be treated disrespectfully. So Rav Soloveitchik would say, it doesn't matter either way. It's a kinui. Reb Chaim Ozer seems to say, somehow it's a kinui. And therefore, you don't want it to be treated disrespectfully. Somehow, G-D is not a kinui. But if you were writing G-O-D, you don't want it to be treated disrespectfully, so that's why there is a reason to write G-D. So how does the Mishnah Berurah paskin? And Siman Pei Hey, Sif Katan Yud. So on this whole issue of erasing God's name in another language, so he's talking about this is a siman where you're not allowed to say divrei Torah around smelly objects in an improper place, in an outhouse. So he says you're not allowed to say it. However, v'kol sheken hashemus she'enim nimchakim aser leimor sham, you're not allowed to say the names that we're not allowed to erase. You're allowed to say in an outhouse. Afilu b'lashon laz, even in another language, kigon got b'lashon Ashkenaz, like God in German, or bugo b'lashon Poland. I don't know if I pronounced that right in Polish. Verussia in Russian. Anyone speak Russian here? How do you say God in Russian?
Bog.
Say that again? Bog. Okay, bog. V'chahai gavna, anything like that. Sh'af sheshem ze ein bo kedusha be'osios ksivaso. Even though that name has no kedusha in the letters when you write it. Umutar lemachko, you're allowed to erase the word God. Mikol makom yesh bo mishum bizayon b'haskaraso b'makom tinofos. It's still disrespectful to say it in a smelly, dirty place like an outhouse. So it's interesting. I saw Rav Moshe Feinstein has 3 tshuvas on the subject, and I don't know how to make heads or tails of them. In the Yoredeya at the beginning, so there are some newer volumes of tshuvas that the family put together after Rav Moshe was nifter, and I think there's still another volume coming out. There might be. So an early one of the volumes he put out himself, Yoredeya. So at the end of Siman Kuf Ayin Beis, the first chelak of Yoredeya, so he seems to say that you're not allowed to say them in vain. You're not allowed to, he says, the safos halaz in any language other than Hebrew, hametsuyin etzleinu, that are around us, like Russian or English. Rak shem got hu Hashem. That name got, that is actually referring to Hashem. Velo shem oibishter v'chadome. Not any other language, not other name. V'nogea ze le'inyan shegarin b'maskira levatala. If someone says that name in vain, then we rebuke him. Say, don't say God's name in vain. He didn't say it in Hebrew. He said it in English. He said it in Yiddish. We still rebuke him for saying Hashem's name in vain. So again, then another tshuva in Arachaim Chelik Beis Simin Mem Tes, he's asked a question about the bracha. So you have a Safek bracha, or let's say you're the rabbi of a shul where nobody speaks Hebrew, so you want to say the blessing in English to make a whole ceremony out of it that people actually know what's going on. So can you wash, say Hamotzi in Hebrew, and then say it again in English, and then eat the bread? Or can you wash, say it in English, and then say it in Hebrew, and then eat the bread? What's the best way to do it? So he said there's no best way to do it. Because no matter what, if you say it in English first, you say with English, and the Hebrew is an interruption, a hefsek. If you say it in Hebrew, you yosei, and then the English is an interruption. So he says, have someone else say it. Have someone who's not from or whatever, have them wash or not wash and say it in English, and then you say it in Hebrew, or vice versa. That's what he suggests. So he said you could be yosei a bracha in English with the name of God in the blessing. So you see so far in 2 tshuvas, he says that the name of God, the name of Hashem in any other language has some sort of kedusha to it. You could be yotzei a bracha, and you shouldn't say it in vain. Then he has another tshuva in one of the later volumes. This is Orachaim Chelek Daled, but this is the tshuva he wrote to his Talmud Rav Ephraim Greenblatt, the Rav Ephraim. So these are tshuvas that are highly relied upon. So in Orachaim Chelek Daled Simin Mem, the Sif Chav Zayin, he again addresses the issue of can you say a bracha in another language like Aramaic? You say Brich, Rachmana. Can you do that? Or you can say it in Yiddish or in English. And he quotes the Aruch HaShulchan, who says he does it all the time. Well, sure, I say it in Aramaic, I say it in Yiddish. And Rav Moshe says, no, you can't. No. That's another language. It's not a bracha. You can't be yotzei. It's stira. He seems to contradict himself. I don't know the answer to that.
You say Kaddish is mostly it's not a bracha, but it's tefillah in Aramaic.
Yeah, okay, but there's no issue of being yotzei or not. Can you say the word Rachmana? That's what we use in, let's say, when they say a bracha in Aramaic, they say Brich Rachmana. So the Aruch HaShulchan says you can say it 100 times in a row, you're not doing anything wrong. but you can still be Yotze the bracha.
But so much tefillah is in
Very, very little of actual tefillah, of actual prayer, is in Aramaic. That's not a prayer. That's like a.
Tefillah, I said. Is that?
It's not. It's a saying.
So, and what is Kaddish then?
Kaddish is an exception, and that's the davar shebekadusha even. You need a minion for that. You need a minion for that. You have to say it standing up. You need a minion for that. So Rav Soloveitchik, just to get back, I think we're out of time. So Rav Soloveitchik pointed out that on Nedarim Dav Zayin, right? Getting back to Nedarim. So Nedarim Dav Zayin, the Rishonim quote a view of the Geonim that even though Kinui is not Hashem's name, you're still not allowed to say these nicknames in vain. And if you do, Gorinbo, we rebuke you. So that would mean that even saying the name God in vain is inappropriate, like some others said, and like Rav Chaim Moses says in terms of writing. But Rav Soloveitchik says that is a chumrah of the Geonim, and it doesn't seem like any poskim actually hold like those Geonim, and therefore he says there's no problem of saying God's name in vain. That's the Rav Soloveitchik shita, and there's no need to write G-T, even if it will be treated disrespectfully. And Rav Chaim Moses seems to say that there is an Indian to write G-D, and the Ramosha, I don't know what to make of Ramosha. Okay.